In this episode, we interview Luke Freeman, Executive Director of Giving What We Can, an organization on a mission to make giving effectively and significantly a cultural norm. Alrighty, so thanks everyone for tuning into this episode 116, I think we're at. Time flies. So tonight we have Luke Freeman, who's the Executive Director of Giving What We Can. Luke, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this is the first interview we've done with somebody very far across the pond. So we appreciate you taking some time, midday for you, night for me. But this is great. So we always start our podcast by asking you, what is the mission in this case of Giving What We Can?
Yeah, so Giving What We Can is a community of effective givers, and we're on a mission to make giving effectively and significantly a cultural norm. So that means that we help donors to find some of the world's most pressing problems and identify charities working to solve them. We're best known for the Giving What We Can pledge, which about 8,000 people have signed, pledging to give about 10% of their lifetime income to the most effective charities. And together that's over $300 million already given and $3 billion pledged.
Jeez. And how do you differentiate given versus pledged? Like, is that like a forecast out of like average age of human or something?
looking at the age and where they live and median incomes and what their income they put in when they first sign up.
Right.
And how
that's a cool metric.
Time.
Yeah. It's impactful. It's cool to look far out and understand what that commitment is. Well, great. So I want to get into the organization, but before we do, why you?
Why me? Well, I've been a member of Giving What We Can since about 2016 myself. And it all started for me quite a long time ago. I was quite young when I first discovered the pretty astonishing and shocking reality of poverty in the world. I remember being pretty dismayed when I found out that kids my age were starving, sick, and even dying because they didn't have access to the same basic resources that I had. That was not due to anything that I'd done, but I'd just been lucky enough to be born into a stable family in a rich country with a lot more available to me. And I felt that there was just a huge injustice to that. I wanted to do something about it. And I wanted to use that relative luck that I'd been given to make the world a lot better. So at that age, there wasn't too much I could do, but I did start by doing things like, conducting fundraisers. In Australia, we have a thing called the 40-hour famine, which was run by World Vision, which was, part of my early journey to try and put myself out there to improve the world for others. Yeah. I then started giving from my own money when I had a paper run. I had a chicken egg business. Even just things from from a young age, my parents encouraged me to think about getting birthday money and things like that if you wanted to use that to help others as well. But then I was, finally got to the point where I was earning, meaningful amount of money. First job out of university, had the, global financial crisis, which meant that things were tough financially. And supporting my now wife, but girlfriend at the time, who didn't have working rights in Australia, got used to living on very little. And so that when I finally got a raise and she got a job, I was like, oh, I'm aware of the hedonic treadmill that often as your expenses increase, as your income does.
Yes.
And I was like, I don't like that. I don't really want to fall into that trap. That seems terrible. And so that's what I decided that right then and there is when I wanted to start giving. It was basically a big part of the difference between the rates that I was getting and what I was earning, and to start building in that habit then. And when you decide to give a decent chunk of money, you suddenly care a lot where that goes. And I almost went to give it to some of the charities that I'd been supporting over the years. But I was like, had a bit of pause. I'm like, is this really the best place I could give it? And that's when I discovered, I did what many people do, jump onto Google and start typing things like, what are the best charities? And how do you evaluate impact? I discovered two organizations, Giving What We Can, where I'm now fortunate enough to be the executive director, and another organization called GiveWell. Both were pretty early in their days. I think that was 2011, and Giving What We Can started in 2009 and GiveWell in 2007. And they were just kind of the first organizations really putting information out around like how you might go about doing as much good you can with the limited charitable dollars that you might have. And I could say kind of there's a lot more of a journey there, but the rest is kind of history.
Yes. Yeah. I have so many questions. So why 10%? Why is that like, is that an average number, or is there data behind that 10%?
Yeah, so look, it's pretty unashamedly borrows from cultural norms. You've got within Christian and Jewish traditions, you've got 10% of income. It's not terribly different to other traditions, like in Islam, there's 2.5% of wealth each year, calculated in kind of interesting ways. But basically, finding an amount that is a lot more than many people are actually giving, but not nearly an amount that's like prohibitively high. So it's trying to kind of find that, that point which is large enough that it's meaningful, that it can make a real big difference to others, but not so large that it's out of reach for many people, especially people in the top half of income earners in rich countries. Many people would take a job that paid them 10% less if it was incredibly, more meaningful. And so it's a similar.
Yeah, if you could that's a good way to think about it. Yeah, it's a good way to think about it for sure.
I've had one member who framed it this way to me once, which I absolutely love, which was Mondays is always hard for them, even though they love their job. It's just so hard to switch gears from a weekend. So they always think that the first half of every Monday, that's they're going into work just for the sake of the world. That's where the money's going to go, and the rest of the week is for themselves.
That's amazing. How in your experience with others who are probably not used to giving back and maybe haven't donated any money, maybe they donated time. How have you seen that first donation happen? And then how have you seen people have a mindset shift? I don't know if it's instantaneous or over time, where they could get to that, meaningful number of 10%, for example. I feel like it's a new concept to a lot of people of giving back a good amount of money, right? So explain to me some of the journeys that maybe you've been a part of.
Yeah, I see it as like exercise. So exercise is one of those things that you hear all the time. I know it should help. Like all the research says that it makes you happier and has all these positive effects. And we see this with giving too. Like all of the psychological research shows that giving makes people happier. It improves their own lives a lot. And we have this good evidence now as well that your money can do a lot of good. But it's one of those things that feels too good to be true. Mm-hmm. Like you're really skeptical. Oh, of course, that's what they're going to say. But then you find, in that moment of kind of conviction, of compassion, and like a desire to help and to act, it's really quite enabling for people. It's quite empowering for them to be able to actually do something, because we often walk around the world seeing things that we're upset by, seeing things that could be better, and really just wishing it were. And there are many things that it's kind of limited times that we're able to act. In our own country, we might get an election once every few years. We only get a chance to pick a job every now and then that might do a bit more good. And even then, right, our skills don't necessarily align with the things that we care most about as well. But giving is one of these things that is pretty flexible. You can do it anywhere, and you can go to anything, anywhere in the world, and you can do it on a regular basis. And that is, it is pretty empowering. So when people get that first donation, often comes from either something relatively benign, like a friend's running a fundraiser and they would do it because they want to support the friend. Or it's, they have, started to come to terms with something in the world that they, see that wants to be different. They do a lot of research. They find something that seems pretty robust, that has a good chance of having a big impact. And then they do it. And normally that, like, I experienced that moment of like putting the credit card information or something. You're like, yeah. But then once it's done, you're like, I did that. That's the thing that I just did. And then a lot of the real joy comes later, is when you're thinking about the problem that next time you're like, oh yeah, but I'm contributing to solving that. or when you're having a conversation with, thinking about like, oh, maybe something you didn't spend money on because you decided that money would be better spent elsewhere. Actually feeling good about not making a purchase. You're like, oh, no, I have a really great reason to not keep up with the Joneses.
Yeah.
I can feel really good about it.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, wow. Well, that's great. This is amazing, and I'm excited to get into it. So 2007 is when you said Giving What We Can started, or is 2009?
2009.
2009,
Perfect.
perfect.
Another organization who is a partner of ours that works in this space.
Gotcha.
Was 2007.
Okay, and then since 2009, at what point, since the inception, did you join the organization? And was it immediate as executive director, or was it different roles?
Yeah, so 2009 started. 2011, I came across it for the first time. Started, just acting on some of the advice. Found it useful. I started. I was inspired by the fact that other people had made a public commitment. And I started giving it around that level, but I wasn't quite ready to commit myself. I was like, I see the value in being public about it, but I'm going to bide my time. And then 2016, I was like, no, I've been doing it for a while. Something that's, as other people putting themselves out there has inspired me. So I'm going to, also do the same and be willing to add to that number of people and the amount given and have that camaraderie. And so I did so. And then it was 2020. The organization was looking for someone to lead it who had executive experience, background in growth, which is I had worked in things like marketing and startups for a while. So kind of the worlds collided, everything came together, and I was in an opportunity to lead an organization which I had a lot of love for, and this mission I care a lot about.
All right. Great. That's a cool history. So you mentioned the pledge as being one of the most well-known aspects of the organization. What are some other programming that you do or activities you focus on or kind of parts of the organization that are kind of your organization, your brand?
Yeah, so it kind of falls into three buckets. You've kind of got the research, which is helping identify really impactful giving opportunities, but also things like helping people think through questions of, how much they should give, or how do they decide between trade-offs in different kind of moral perspectives as to like, do you include animals or future people in your giving, and how you have those trade-offs. So kind of helping people think through both practical research as well as kind of more philosophical research as well. Like, how do you think through these decisions? So we've got a lot of resources there, things like cause pages, charity pages, our giving recommendations, top charities and things like that. There's the community side of it, which is things like our pledge members, our events and things like that as well. Try to give people things to organize, kind of build that identity and that culture, and also just giving information in that more kind of interpersonal one-on-one basis and in group settings. And then we have a donation platform as well. So a lot of the opportunities that are pretty high impact that we see that meet our bar. We work with our trusted evaluators who spend over 50,000 hours a year researching these charitable giving opportunities and other high impact projects. So we make many of them available to donors to give to via us, which means that they're able to give to multiple different high impact charities and funds together at the same time. And if they have done something like taking Giving What We Can pledge or a trial pledge, they can see how their impact is tracking to what they've committed to do as well.
Wow. High impact. How is that defined? as I interrupt you as you drink your tea. Sorry about that.
Thank you for...
Yes. Sorry.
High impact. So, often we're thinking about the effects of what we're giving to. So anything you give to, ideally, you're aiming for some effect in the world. If you're supporting a program that is focused on education, you're wanting to improve educational outcomes or educational attainment, or even better, you're often thinking, well, what does that actually mean for lives? Does that mean that they have, they're happier or they have more economic opportunities and things like that? So often you're trying to think about what are these really, what are the ultimate things that you're aiming towards? And like at its most, simple, it is often just improved well-being. So whether it's through health or education, economic opportunity, like better environment that people are in, but there are often proxy measures along the way. So you might look at, in the case of climate change, you might be wanting to think about CO2 reduction or something like that. In the case of health, there are pretty standard measures. Actually, a lot of this started off by the field of health economics and looking at things like disability adjusted life years or quality adjusted life years, or is even a new one, a well-being adjusted life year, which looks at subjective well-being scores. So how do people rate themselves before and how good their life is before or after an intervention. So when you're thinking about impact, you're trying to think, well, how do we get as much of whatever that impact measure, and really not just that measure, because you got the bias whenever you measure something, you could be not exactly measuring what you're really after. So you want to look at a synthesis of different things you're aiming for, which is ultimately aimed at improving lives.
And does your organization dive deep into the data of all these other nonprofits that they're providing, or do you do your own research separate from the data that a nonprofit would be providing?
Yeah, so there's quite an ecosystem here.
Yeah.
So you've got organizations like JPAL and ID Insight doing things in the fields of things like global poverty and health and economic intervention. So they do a lot of on-the-ground research. A lot of charities and nonprofits and do a lot of their own like internal evaluation and monitoring work as well. So you're able to see how many people does this program reach? What are the health outcomes? You also got things like scientific evidence as well. So you can see, well, okay, we know that lead has like so much evidence is like terrible for human flourishing. It has very significant effects for people's ability to learn and to function in the world. And there's also other health effects as well. So if you care about health, education, or anything like that, you don't want lead in the environment. You can kind of quantify that. You go, well, how might you get rid of that? Well, go to where are places in the world where lead is still quite prevalent, and that they're bringing policies and monitoring the impact of those policies could reduce the amount of impact lead in the environment there. You've got something like distributing insecticide-treated bed nets, so more kind of product delivery, service delivery type intervention. That they have, costs $5 approximately to distribute a bed net, like the full cost of like getting it there, making it and everything. And that, for every 1,000 or so bed nets, there is one death averted of a child under the age of 5. So that after taking a lot of conservative assumptions to make sure that you're thinking about the counterfactual, what would have happened otherwise, you say, look, it's about $5,000 to save a life, which is sounds like a lot of money to some people, sounds like barely anything to others, depending on who you ask. But in places like Australia and the US, we're often willing to spend about $1 million per life saved through our health systems. And when you compare $5,000 to that, that's tiny.
I am so curious about that number as well. But before I forget, another question: the organizations that you work with, are they all different sizes, from small, medium, large, or is there kind of a more medium and large organizations that you're working with?
Yeah, so they vary of all sizes, and there's like different approaches to seeking out impact as well. So as I mentioned in another organization earlier, GiveWell, they do a lot of the kind of hard data analysis for organizations doing direct delivery in working particularly in things like global poverty and global development. So they'll build models of, you put this amount of this intervention here, where does the next funding need, like what's the next tranche of funding going to go towards, and trying to think about what is that next dollar going to get you. And generally they're looking at highly scalable interventions. So that might be, let's get an entire country or region within a country where it's blanketed in bed nets and try and wipe out malaria, relatively speaking, ideally in that region. And that's going to cost tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. And we've got to fundraise across a large number of people to do that. And there are reasons which we can go into later why, that there are failures in government and international aid and everything, why those funding gaps still exist today. Then you've got, on the complete other end of the spectrum, you might have something like charity entrepreneurship, which we work with, where they do in-house research, looking both at pretty concrete interventions like the lead policy stuff that I was talking about earlier, as well as more meta work or theoretical stuff, and go, okay, well, what are these gaps that currently exist, and can we start new organizations? Given the first $50,000 or something like that, it's much less than tens or hundreds of millions, to start trying to see if this intervention that seems pretty promising is impactful.
Yep.
And so the organization sizes do vary quite a lot, and everything from small grants. You could have like an individual researcher who has a novel idea for how to reduce the spread of viruses or something like that. You go, well, here is the scale of the problem. How many people it affect by how much, and you go, how tractable is this? How likely is it that this research would result in the outcome that is expected, and how neglected is it? So, like, are there a lot of people doing this kind of research? Has this been tried a bunch and keeps failing, or is this just something pretty novel, pretty innovative? It has a good chance of success.
Yeah. I don't know why, but that reminded me of an interview I saw with Elon Musk, where he was putting a math equation on where he should invest his time in terms of how big of an impact can a car company have on the world versus XYZ. And it's just his mathematical equation for entrepreneurs on ideation and creating new business ideas. It's really cool. I love the data behind this conversation. So we've interviewed, I don't know, 100 plus nonprofits over the past couple, like 2.5 years. And I'd say the majority of them are small and medium sized, anywhere from 1 to 15 people total. We've interviewed some that are larger than that, but I'd say the vast majority are in that smaller and medium range. And they're not measuring, because a lot of times they're just bootstrapping their organization. They're just an executive director and maybe a small team that's just fundraising from friends, but having pretty big impact because they're usually ingrained in the communities that they're serving, and they're providing a lot of times basic needs for youth, for individuals who've been formerly incarcerated, trying to get back on their feet. So the impact is pretty, I'd say, a micro scale in terms of geography, but in terms of the dollar of the $1 million per life, you could argue that it's a pretty big impact in that sense. How would you, or what would you say to these smaller and medium-sized nonprofits that are just hyper localized, deep in the communities, not necessarily seeking to solve world hunger, but maybe more so seeking to heal their communities in some, minor way at a global scale, but major way locally?
Yeah, I'd say that, look, I'm always thrilled that people are working hard to improve the lives of others. Like, that is where it all starts for me, is that if people are seeking to look outside of themselves and improve the lives of others, that is what we need a lot more of in the world. I'm also in a small, medium-sized organization too. Yeah. There's staff of a similar kind of fall right in the middle of that headcount-wise. And we find evaluating our programs, just so helpful for deciding how to spend the limited resources that we have. So it's a feedback mechanism. So if you're working in a community, do you know who you're serving? Which programs are serving them best? Are you collecting that data? Are you getting that feedback, qualitative and quantitative? Because, and especially important is to get the feedback from those who it's affecting. So, and this can be done at a small scale or at a large scale. Like, in the example of some of the programs I mentioned from GiveWell, they're looking at adjusting different health outcomes across a large population and involving those people as going, okay, well, would you rather this or would you rather that? Like, how much would this improve your life? If you only had this much to spend, how would you spend it? But that can be done at a small scale as well, getting the feedback from people in your community. But data can be incredibly enlightening, just seeing what actually is the ground truth. And it's a really good way of de-biasing yourself as well. Obviously, data itself can be, you've got lies, damn lies, and statistics. You can say you can mislead with data as well, and you can over focus on the wrong things. And I've seen this happen a lot. People focus on a proximate outcome as if it is the end goal of what you're focusing on. That being said, it's very transparent. It's a good way to involve your stakeholders as well. They know that the support that they're giving you is resulting in the things that they care about and that you care about.
Wow. So you've talked about the history. You've talked about what are some of the three buckets that you mentioned of focus that your organization has today. What do you hope in another 5, 10, 15, 100 years for the organization, giving what we can?
Yeah, for me, it keeps coming back to the core mission and that cultural piece. Like, I think that a lot flows on from that, and we haven't cracked it yet. We haven't yet found the mimetic, golden egg. But figuring out and working towards trying to change the culture around giving, that it's not something that is quiet and hidden away in an uncomfortable topic that is seen as a waste of money that isn't bettering your life or the life of your immediate loved ones around you. But it's seen as something that is expected of people, especially those who have the most. It's seen as something that is cherished by the people who do it. It's seen as something that is inspiring, that people around you who are giving are like open about it and talking about it and trying to do better, and aware that we're all in this together. It's a journey. We don't have all the right answers yet, but it's worth trying. It's worth trying to improve our giving as we go along. It's worth asking more from those who we're giving money to ensure that money is handled well, it is going to good use, and that people are giving not just their money, but their time and their expertise and their political and social capital and all of the types of things that we can give to ensure that causes that are really important to the world, that those who are most disenfranchised are given what they need, and that we're all taking part and doing what we can.
Yeah. Wow. So engagement, people that are listening and are inspired by what you're doing and what your organization is doing, and maybe even want to make the pledge, how could they get engaged? What type of engagement do you look for?
Yeah, like we're talking about before, getting to that first donation is often the biggest thing. And one thing I'd encourage is, as I mentioned before, we have the Giving What We Can website. We have information and resources there. I encourage you to have a look around at some of the high impact organizations that we've identified, and just see the work that they're doing. See like, oh, wow, this is something you probably haven't even considered. A lot of people, their conception of charity is, rather narrow, just because it's the stuff that we see around us and the stuff we hear about a lot. But you're like, oh, wow, research to prevent pandemics, or changing policy so there isn't as much lead in like this country that I wasn't really aware of. It's like the world is big and there is amazing work going on, and some of it is just really neglected and can be incredibly impactful. And learning more about those organizations, how they work, what they do, and coming up with a little menu of the things that you want to start supporting. I think getting to that first, doing it once, maybe doing it on a regular basis, and then, that dipping your toe in the water, I think is just an excellent way to start.
Oh, wow.
What was one thing that one of our founders was on the Armchair Expert podcast, and one of the hosts, he was going to buy a motorcycle in Dax, and he decided, look, I'm not going to buy it. I'm going to give that away instead. And then the other host, she said she was had her eye on a designer dress, I think it was, and she's going to not buy that and instead give some money away. And I think that's another way of starting, is going, look, think of something you were going to do for yourself that you kind of like thought was a bit of a guilty pleasure. Maybe substitute that for giving to someone else, giving that away, and reflect, see how that feels. Do you feel better?
Wow. No, that's great. That's great. So listeners, do that. Research more about Giving What You Can, about the pledge, about what it means. And this is great. So other than that, is there anything that you want to leave us with, maybe that we didn't cover, or any tidbits that you've been thinking about, or want truth bombs, sometimes they say?
Yeah, the other thing I would just say is, like, I'm really appreciative of the many thousands of people who've made a pretty significant change to their life to include others as a pretty core focus. The members and donors that I get to interact with at Giving What We Can are just some of the most incredible, genuine, compassionate people. And also the thing is the evaluation partners we work with, the organizations in this space, it is just really fantastic to see people so focused on seeing change and being like so obsessive about a better world that they're willing to like nerd out about it. and they're the people who I want to say like thank you, because the work that they do enables us to share these great high impact opportunities with donors and members, and to see the impact of that work is just such a fantastic thing to come into work every day, even when things get hard on other fronts. That keeps me going.
Oh, well, Luke, really appreciate your time these past 30 minutes, and mad kudos to you for the work that you've been doing with the small team, the impact that you're sharing, that you've had, driving more people to give back, whether it's their time, talent, treasure, testimony, whatever they can, and kind of being that little push, I'd say, for people that want to give back but don't really know where to start. So, Luke, really appreciate your time, and we're really honored to share this work and this story with the rest of the world.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you know of a great organization or individual leaving a positive impact, we'd love to tell their story. Check us out and contact us at gtzp.org. Don't forget, for more stories like this, you could also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Instagram followers are link trees in the bio. And for podcast listeners, we are on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thanks for listening, and see you again soon.